And we're going to think a little bit further now. It'll be a little bit more provocative. Because if in a way the task of the Riga conference is to think about how we achieve our aims, how we're forward-leaning, how we're ambitious and brave, we have to understand the world that we're going to be moving into. We have to understand how we're competitive and how we're leaders, not only today, but where the world is going in 10 years' time. So the session we're about to start looks at those questions. It's on the new global order, projecting 10 years ahead. Do we have the right friends? Do we have the right technologies, approaches? Do we have the right institutions to be who we want to be in the next 10 years and beyond? To lead this incredibly important conversation, I'm going to invite on stage the moderator, Charlotte Rude, the Deputy Director of the Stockholm Center for Eastern European Studies. Charlotte, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Can you all hear me? Yeah? Wonderful. So I think this is the most difficult panel we have these days, actually, because we're not only zooming out in space, we're covering the whole world. We're also zooming out in time, trying to look ahead. So I have some brave and very, very impressive people on my panel, and I will introduce them to you and ask you to come up to the stage. So I'll start with you, Juan Batelema, who is the security advisor of the defense minister of Argentina. You have traveled here all the way from Buenos Aires. Please have a seat. You're also a professor at the Naval War College and the academic director of the Argentinian Council on Foreign Relations. Then we have Dr. Jason Isaacson, who is heading policy and political affairs at the American Jewish Congress Committee, and who has traveled here from Tokyo, which is a little bit surprising. Okay. Yes, please. And who will speak both about the world, but of course especially about the Middle East. Nice to meet you. Then we have Hiro Akita, who is a well-known friend to many of us. Please come up to the stage. Hiro is a senior correspondent, expert on security affairs at Nikkei, Japan. And finally, last but not least, we have Una Berzina-Cherenkova, who is the head of the Asia department of the Latvian Institute of International Affairs and a great China expert as well. So now I will sit down. So we live in a world of confrontation, right? I mean, this is a given. We talk about this axis of upheaval, axis of evil, axis of jerks, like a quad of chaos. I mean, all these things that we talk about. And the question is, if we look ahead, how can we, and with we I mean Europe, I mean the West, and I mean global democracies, how can we navigate that? How can we mitigate the challenges that brings? And can we change it? Can we affect this? Do we have the means? And more importantly, maybe, do we have the confidence? Do we actually believe in our own capacity to do this? I think the most interesting part of this panel is that we're going to look 10 years ahead. And I say that my panelists are brave because we often shy away from projecting the future. I mean, it's a very dangerous business. It's, you know, people will come back to you and say, well, you were wrong. But that is actually how we build a strategic vision. And that is how we build a strategy. I mean, we set out where we want to be, and we think about what do we need to do to achieve this. So I would like to say that this panel, this discussion we have here, should be a safe space for imagination. Please be brave, and please be assured that at the Riga conference of 2034, nobody is going to check whether what you said today was right. I'm sure it will be, but there's no penalty. I mean, we're here to think together.
Yes, thank you.
So I would like to start with you, Juan, as a representative of Latin America, I mean, I think the discussions we've had here have been maybe 85% about Russia and Ukraine, which is absolutely natural given where we are. Maybe 10% China, and maybe 5% Middle East, and I mean mainly Iran. But I don't think anyone has said a single word about Latin America. Now this is going to change.
Probably good not to say any word of Latin America. Well, but thank you. It's an honor and a privilege to be with you in this afternoon. And also it is funny because if you consider that I am going to talk about the future, and I came from Latin America, which is the long future for us is 3 to 6 months in political planification. It's quite good to think on 10 years. But also the best part is because we can predict anything, and also we can say that because of unpredictable political reasons, everything changed and we failed completely in our predictions. So it is good for me to be here. So let me start with one or two important things about what is going on in Latin America and how can we project in 10 years. First of all, this idea of geopolitical transition. For us, geopolitical transition has a good of meaning because the next 10 years can be revealed in the work of great geopoliticians. It's a classical one. It's called Sir Halford Mackinder. Maybe you know quite well, because in a transition times in 1904, he divided the war in 3 areas. No, the heartland, the rimland, or the inner crescent, and the outer crescent. If you look today's ongoing wars in Ukraine or the defensive war that Israel is engaging against Iran is its proxies, they are all located in the rimland, right? And Latin America is in the outer crescent. And when we try to establish a parallel and what is going to happen is that in the First and the Second World War, Latin America and Africa, as a part of a formal or an informal European empires, helped them to win the war. So in the next 10 years, if the third war rise, which is going to be in a place between in the Pacific, in the second, in the first and the second island, chain island, probably the outer crescent is going to be more active again, and Argentina and other countries are going to play a role. But if you try to look into the differences of that time, is that we are not any longer part of a formal or an informal empire. So Russia, China, and Iran has a strong foothold in Latin America, and that is a reality right now. And they prove quite able to create several constraints in our capability to help, for example, Ukraine in the war of Ukraine. They put a lot of political pressure under our governments to prevent that, for example, weapons and ammunition in our stock can be delivered to Ukraine, even if we are in favor of Ukraine. So this is an important issue because, for example, if a war between China and Taiwan happens, the Chinese are going to be able to put us outside any political clash, because they can prevent, because they have plenty of business in Latin America. So this is one important situation that is going to be considered by the European and also by the United States. United States is quite clear on that. The European, not so much, because as you said, 10% of the time, or less than 10% of the time, Europeans think on Latin America, which wasn't the reality in the 20th century. Let me give you one example of the 10 years future looks like. Russia has 3 main allies in Latin America: Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. All of them are near to Panama Canal. In that situation, as you probably know, the Panama Canal is one of the main sea line of communication for commerce. There are 2 secondary line of communications in Latin America, in the Western Hemisphere. The Northwest Passage in Canada, and the other one is the Magallanes Strait near to Antarctica, which share with Chile and Argentina. It belongs to Chile, but Argentina has played a role there. So what happened if some kind of maize strategy executed in a coordinated way between China, Russia, and Iran in the Suez Canal, in the Malacca Strait, and in the Panama Canal happened? And that could happen in the next 3 to 10 years. So transition in Latin America, it is important. Why it is important? Because we are going to be supplier of energy and food security. The other important issue why Latin America is, I think it is important, is because the other thing that we were talking in this conference, which is transformation. Transformation is the most difficult part because, as we know, it was predicted by Ray Kurzweil in The Singularity is Near, that the merge between the virtual and the material space. And that creates a lot of uncertainties, but a lot of frustration in Latin American people. Nobody knows what is going to happen in our future as developed countries. And right now, when we look at Latin America, or when you look at Latin America, most of our political problems are because we are nervous about the future. We are grim about the future. These are not optimistic times. They are pessimistic times. And as most of the science fiction is able to present to us, these are times of paranoias and paralysis. Political and economic situation in Latin America is a kind of paranoia, plenty of conspiracy theory, and there are a growing sense of eroding democracies, institutional democracies. And let me give you one example. We all know that democratic institution works in the base of trust. But every single political leader in Latin America do not trust in the virtues of the democratic system, and they are able to use the new technology as generative AI, for example, to alter and to affect political perception. So there are quite challenging times in Latin America, and that is going to be my first reflection on that.
Thank you so much, Juan. I think you have really both made the case for why we should look at Latin America in a more serious way, and you've also given some new fuel to my nightmares, talking about the Panama Canal and what might happen. I will come back to you, and when I do, I want to ask you concretely about what you said about the constraints being put on leaders to support Ukraine, and how that actually plays out specifically in Argentina, a country that is very supportive. So, but we'll come back to that. I'll move on to you, Jason. I wanted to ask you about, in 2034, what could be a best case scenario for the Middle East? I mean, we hear a lot of news, obviously, about what is happening, and I think a lot of people are very worried. So it's hard to think of something positive that could happen. And maybe, you don't really have a best case scenario, but maybe you can try.
I can try, and I can also pick up on some things that Juan just said as well.
Yes, please.
First of all, thank you for allowing me to be part of this panel. And also what Juan started out by saying, that looking ahead 10 years is a luxury that very few of us have an opportunity to enjoy. 3 to 6 months may be likelier, and in the case of the Middle East, 3 to 6 days. We've seen what has just happened in the last week or so, where there have been substantial changes in the region. The confirmation yesterday of the death of Yahya Sinwar changes significantly the prospect for advancing some kind of Israel peace or end of the hostilities in Gaza. Israel's calculation of how it can get out of the war in Gaza and return the hostages. What happened a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, with the death of Hassan Nasrallah, clearly changed the picture of the future of that conflict. And the success of Iranian efforts and Iranian proxy efforts to drive Israelis into the sea to destroy the state of Israel. And Israel's victory in both of those cases, achievements in both of those cases, could set the stage for a very new reality and a very much more positive reality. So if you ask for positive news, I can start with that, and I can probably end with that, because frankly, looking ahead, except maybe for the prospect that the Iranian theocracy is not sustainable. So unpopular in the Iranian public, so unpopular in the region. It has done nothing but sow chaos in the region, and violence in the region, and death in the region, that at some point, I'm hoping in the next decade, we will see a turn in Tehran in a different direction, in a more positive direction. But that's more of a hope than a prediction. I'm just hoping that that's the direction we go. But if I can zoom out, which I've never before had the chance to do, so thank you for giving me that chance, away from just the Middle East to the world, I have to say I'm really pessimistic about the world. For a lot of reasons. First of all, some of it regarding my own country, U.S. policy, will be determined on what happens in our election in 3 weeks, a little less than 3 weeks. We may not know the answer for 3 months, but nevertheless. Will America continue to be an exemplar of democracy, a forceful, thoughtful, responsible leader in the world? There are big questions about that. I like to think that the institutions of American democracy are strong. The will, the intentions of the American public are strong and reliable, but I'm not certain, and we'll know more in a few weeks. But a lot will depend, a great deal will depend, including, of course, the safety of this country and the stability of Europe and the fight against aggression from Russia. But it's not only the American election that is a question that hangs over this. I'm also looking at the prospect over the next 10 years of shrinking populations in China and Russia, imposing new kind of dynamics for those countries and new considerations by those countries. I'm looking at whether the American adherence to alliances not only NATO, but in East Asia as well, will be maintained, and what impact that will have on peace and stability across the world and prosperity across the world. But then away from politics, there are other issues. We haven't. I don't know if you. I just arrived at this conference, so I don't know if this has been discussed in the last day or so. But climate-induced stressors and the impact that has on migration, the impact that will have on, especially in Africa, but also Asia and Latin America, public health crises. We just saw what happened in the pandemic. Why should we not expect similar effects over the next 10 years, particularly induced by climate change? Religious extremism. So I'm hoping that in the case of Iran, religious extremism will be on the wane and rather than rising. But I am not confident that that's the case. It's entirely possible, particularly with climate-induced stressors and other tensions and anxieties in the world. People will be drawn into religious extremist answers. And if fundamentalism is the rule of the day, we're all in trouble. And if I haven't depressed you enough, picking up also very briefly on something that Juan just said, it's entirely possible that artificial intelligence-induced changes in the labor market may be making a lot of professional positions no longer necessary to be carried out by human beings. Maybe also accelerating the automation takeover of manufacturing will put a lot of people out of work and make a lot of people very angry and very frustrated and possibly very violent, I'm sorry to say. And then lastly, social media. I don't know to what extent that's been addressed in the course of this conference, but on my flight here, I was reading an article in the New Yorker magazine about the effect of social media on teen suicide. There's been a lot written about that, and there have been congressional hearings on that in America. And there's some dispute about whether social media is better for people or worse for people. I think it's mostly worse for people. I put my phone over there, so I'm a little bit immune for a few minutes. But really, to what extent is that going to affect how we look at each other, how we communicate with each other, how we feel a sense of responsibility for our communities, or whether we're just stuck to our phones and these artificial networks that people have created for themselves and isolating themselves from the rest of humanity and therefore not caring about the rest of humanity. And how will that future of selfish, self-centered individuals shape politics? And with that last depressing thought, I will hold my fire.
Thank you. It's not easy being the moderator here, because when you ask all these questions, I feel like I should answer them, and I can't. I'm sure our dear audience is now duly depressed. And I think we move on to Una, and especially looking at China and this whole question of a new global order or a changed global order. What kind of order is China actually trying to achieve? And is there a way for us to use our agency? I think agency is one of the things that you are really talking about here as well, Jason. Is there a way for us to influence that or to change that or use that in a positive way if we look ahead 10 years?
I actually want to argue that there is, but then again, I'm a member of a profession that soon will be made redundant by AI. But jokes aside, we hear this trope a lot that the EU is clinging to this old order. The US is kind of knows how to play the new rules, and China is the player that feels like it's ushering in something new, something that, carving out a bigger position for itself. And then the question very often is, what is this change and where can we read about it? And my argument today is that we should look at the Global Development Initiative. And I picked the Global Development Initiative, actually, on purpose, because normally when we talk about the document which lays out China's ambition, we always mention the Global Security Initiative. It's scarier. But I want to argue today that that is where therein lies the rub, in fact, and Global Development Initiative is the one that we should be looking at, because that is the most challenging one for the liberal international consensus as it stands. First of all, just to give you a little bit of a background, it's been moving fast within the UN. There's a group of friends of Global Development Initiative. Not least, Russia has endorsed the Global Development Initiative. It has appeared in China-Russia documents, such as the Strategic Partnership of Coordination for the New Era, the most recent one signed by Xi and Putin. And it's clear that the nations that kind of form, that not necessarily always agree with China, but they do see that this document has good language to undercut the influence of Western states and to persuade other players. In a sense, you don't have to pick sides, but we are a big developing country ourselves, and we provide alternative development. And guess what? The message is, you don't have to be politically liberal. You don't have to be pluralist. You can follow your own civilizational needs, which is, by the way, a very selectively traditionist approach, right? And this is how you can develop. So don't believe the Westerners in their suits who say that, you have to follow the path that they followed, because it's a hypocritical story. So, and we already see that this has moved from just conversation to real initiatives within the UN. We've seen a president of the Assembly, the president endorse this initiative and say, it's, we're all starving for positive agendas here, I know, and especially non-Western native positive agendas. So in a sense, I think China very, in a testament to a good stratcom in China's interest, identified that and filled that niche with the Global Development Initiative. But then the future is not set in stone, and what is the one scenario that we want to avoid? I guess let's draw that out, apart from all the scenarios previous speakers have hinted towards. Well, it would be a scenario where China's approach becomes more mainstream, and that will lead to nuclear proliferation. That is absolutely clear. I wonder if Hiro is going to talk more about that. It is a scenario of simmering conflicts, because you need to feed those conflicts. You don't want them to escalate, but also you don't want them to go away because they're helpful. It is obviously a scenario of very expensive global trade, which we will all be paying for. And in this scenario, and that leads me to the thinking points that we were given before the panel, in this scenario, large alliances become redundant. There are these dinosaurs that just don't work anymore, because there's just no time for compromise. Everything about everything about NATO and everything about the EU, even more so, is a compromise. You start off from somewhere and you finish miles off of the position that you started off with, and that's just not going to work in that world, in that scenario. And what does that mean for players like Latvia? That would mean that we will suffer, because there's going to be a very high defense buy-in. And we will not be able to match that. It would also be a scenario where there would be no division along theater lines anymore, something that we're already standing with one foot in a sense, right? As this very diverse, panel is a testament to. And this, of course, is a scenario where U.S. withdrawal from Europe is a reality. But I want to make an argument. You said nobody's going to check us against delivery in 10 years. I'm holding you up to that promise, Charlotte, because I want to actually make an optimistic projection, an optimistic prediction. It's not going to happen. It's not just going to happen on the merit of China's initiatives alone. Because for the Chinese ideology and the Russia-endorsed vision of it to be successful, and I want to quote Schuman, Fulton, and Gehring, Beijing must convince enough of the world that its proposed principles are not merely alternatives to those of the US-led rules-based order, but superior ones, better able to resolve conflicts, tackle challenges, and promote prosperity. And I want to argue that it will not be enough with the leverage, with the lack of leverage that we are seeing today to get there in 10 years. But it's also a wake-up call for us to keep being able to provide. And in a lot of ways, that also means to pay. To pay to make sure that we still have that leverage. I'll stop here.
Thank you. A lot of really good points there, I think. And I mean, my first thought in my head about your positive scenario and the idea of superiority. I mean, when you speak with African officials, for example, who are invited to Shanghai or to other places in China, I'm not sure they really always look at the fine print. I think they see the glitter. You know, they see the big skyscrapers, and maybe that's seductive enough. I mean, that's just a thought from my side, and I think there are lots of things that we can unpack also about the large alliances, and I mean the BRICS meeting that will take place next week. But I want to bring in Hiro here, and I want to ask you, what should we do then? I mean, is there a way to handle the dragon and separate the dragon from the bear, and you know, actually find an approach in your part of the world that would work?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm from Japan, so I'm afraid I have to say that I'm from one of the most dangerous geostrategic location in the world. Japan is facing a big bear, a violent bear, Russia, and a big dragon. And then the dragon doesn't breathe fire, but they expand militarily. And then on the top of that, we are facing isolated, small, but ruthless hedgehog. Hedgehog, that is North Korea. And all of them have a nuclear bomb. So my maybe observation could be a bit more pessimistic than other panelists, but I hope it is realistic. So in that context, I'd like to make 2 points. One is about the distinctive differences of the threat being posed by China, Russia, North Korea. And second is about the risk, worst scenario could be the simultaneous war, both in Europe and Asia. It is not, we discussed about the defeat of Ukraine as a nightmare scenario, but it could be even worse. Sorry, this room is already in a gloomy atmosphere, but sorry to accelerate that. So on the first point, threat being posed by North Korea, Russia, China. I think that if I use a metaphor of climate change or global weather, I think that North Korea is, after all, tornado or cyclone. So cyclone can kill people. Cyclone is very destructive, but they can hit once or twice, and cyclone disappear. So if North Korea use nuke, maybe it will be the end of their existence. So that is North Korea. There are many threats like that in the world. And Russia is a hurricane. Maybe not just single hurricane, but several, 2 or 3 hurricanes. So Russia can kill people. Russia can destroy infrastructure. But all hurricane will hit the peak and then fade away. So Russia is, after all, declining power. But it is, I'm not saying it is safer, it is more dangerous because hurricane knows that they have to disappear. So they want to do everything they could do before they fade away. That is the reason why they are invading Ukraine. They could invade even further. And lastly, I think that China is climate change. China does not kill you tomorrow. China will not invade Taiwan tomorrow. But China is constantly changing the ecosystem of the global security climate or global order by using economic power, like a global development initiative, global security initiative. Also, they have a global civilization initiative. So they are changing constantly. And I think that climate change is more dangerous sometimes because climate change will cause more hurricanes. Climate change will cause more cyclones everywhere. So my prescription is that we have to deal cyclone, hurricane, climate change simultaneously. And in order to do that, maybe cyclone is we have to be more resilient. And in order to deal with hurricane, maybe we have to build more, better houses, better infrastructure, so that we can endure or counter. But climate change is, we have to almost also promote our version of climate change again. If we just become passive and try to be defensive against climate change of China, they will keep going. So that is the first point. And second point is about the impact of a nightmare scenario. So as we discussed in this conference, there is a growing connectivity in linking war in Europe and Middle East and Asia. I really feel that way. So specifically, China, Russia, and also North Korea and Russia, Iran are collaborating each other mutually. And if I observe from Tokyo, especially North Korea's cooperation with Russia is very, very bad. North Korea not only had provided millions of artillery shells to Russia, that has been killing many Ukrainian people, but also, according to Mr. Zelensky, Russia is ready to send 10,000 soldiers to Ukraine to fight against Russia. This means that it is not just Russian aggression to Ukraine, but this will be the war between Ukraine and Russia, North Korea. So it's going to be a totally different context. So, and then this cooperation is not a one-way street, and Russia is constantly reciprocating to North Korea and China's military support. So I'm sure that Russia is providing more sophisticated military assistance to North Korea to develop its better missiles. And also, China and Russia conducted joint military exercises and joint military patrol 11 times this year in Asia alone. So my point is, to finish, my point is that this axis of forever are collaborating each other in Europe and Asia, and also if I add Iran, Middle East. And if we have to deal with them comprehensively, nightmare scenario is not just a defeat of Ukraine, but it's a simultaneous war, namely the risk of Third World War. So that is my observation.
Thank you.
Sorry to make it very gloomy, but
thank you so much, Hiro. I mean, that is certainly a tall order to deal with both the cyclone and the hurricane and climate change at the same time. And I think the only way to do that is jointly, right? So if we sort of look into what I said about, do we have the means? Do we have the collaborations, the initiatives that we actually need to exert our agency and actually do something about this? I mean, what we have today is a very complicated web of different types of mini lateralisms. I mean, and it can be quite confusing. Things like India both being part of the Quad and a BRICS country, or Turkey being an EU candidate country and a NATO member, and willing to join BRICS. I mean, it's not all clear-cut at the moment, but Juan, your country actually withdrew its application to BRICS.
Exactly.
And you're talking now about becoming a partner to NATO. At the same time, I mean, if we look more broadly at your region, Brazil will be hosting a BRICS meeting next year, a BRICS summit.
Again, that's the problem with the 6 to 1 year and the change of government. For example, the previous administration went too close to give the Chinese another strategic position near to Antarctica in the Ushuaia province, which is going to close the Magallanes Strait in case of the war in the Pacific arise. For example, we are connected to a probable war in the Pacific because we have a dual space installation from China in the Neuquén province, which is nobody knows, or somebody knows, but not us, which it is part of the ICBM program in China. Nobody knows. Supposedly, it belongs to the China's Space Administration. But you know, in the case of China, this civil-military fusion, it is a problem. So we decided to move quickly and to move fast in order to give some assurance, because it was in our interest. I do not want, as an Argentina, I do not want an unstable South Atlantic. But the previous administration want to bring the Chinese and the Russian and the South Atlantic because they thought that it's going to be some impact in the negotiation for the Malvinas Falklands issue. I am in the opposite side. I do not think that it's a smart, it is a smart move. And we decided to join the NATO Global Partner. And after we decided to join the NATO Global Partner, but not only, also to move to the combined maritime forces, the Russians started a media campaign in order to exploit the divisions that in our political landscape we face. And they are quite intelligent because they are quite smart because they usually use our Latin American past and our strange and complicated relation with the United States. Whoever knows everything a little bit on Latin American, the Yankees, the gringos, are our enemy, and they made every possible issue to keep us poor, which is false, of course. And the Chinese exploit the future. And the point that you made are quite good, because if you look the difference between the USSR and the Chinese, the USSR has nothing to offer to Latin Americans. And Russia has a small thing to offer to Latin America. But China has plenty of things to offer to Latin America. For example, the skyscrapers. We love the skyscraper. We love computers. We love every single piece of modernity that we can have in our hand. We want it. So the Chinese have something to offer. And it is interesting because the United States do not have anything to offer. Just be a good friend. And where is the Apple computer for us? We have plenty of Huawei, plenty of ZTE, but there is no Apple computer, and we want to Apple computer, and the Americans cannot handle that. They are always busy with other part of the world, not with the Latin America. I'm not sure if that is a bless or a curse, to be fair, but that is the reality. And let me join one thing on Jason, looking into the future, how connected is Latin America, what is going on right now, and how can complicate things in the near future, because we are in the outer crescent. When you look at the Middle East, there is no more Doctrine Monroe, which was the way that United States deal with the great power, the European great power in Latin America. Latin America is open. Again, geographical position. Russia and China are located in the northern part of South America. Iran is located in Venezuela and in Bolivia. And in Bolivia is located and working with the Bolivian in a new development of drones. Why is that? Because between Bolivia, Argentina, and Chile, there are larger deposits of lithium. So part of the components that Iran used to go to attack Ukraine came from Bolivia. And another important issue that is going on right now, Brazil is able to challenge United States and to work with Iran and other countries in order to produce nuclear material. They tried under the Lula administration in 2010 and they failed, and now they are wanting to do it because they think this is the right time to do it. And that is how open Latin America is right now. And it is complicated, but we are a good thing in Latin America that we all conceive ourselves as a kind of brotherhood, the Spanish brotherhood, except Brazil, which is Portuguese imperial. And that idea creates some sense of brotherhood and some sense of territorial stability. Maybe we are going to face cyclones or hurricanes, but we are not able to deal with the climate change. And one last thing on Russia. Russia has the capability to menace us in order to declare us as a belligerent party if we gave Ukraine weapons to if we gave weapons to Ukraine to defend itself. They can claim to us a belligerence and be consequence. At least the United States, the European has NATO. We do not have any such of agreement. So it is, fear works in the case of Latin America.
Even in Argentina.
Even
in Argentina. I'm sure, Jason, you will have some comments on some of the things that Juan just said.
I do, but I also I feel that in all of my pessimism, I neglected one positive that I should have talked about.
Another point that will give me nightmares. I was hoping you would bring
like
it
we end on a
something
good
positive.
note. I'll do that now. Because other than the killing of terrorist masterminds over the last couple of weeks, which was a good thing for the world as well as for the region. Also, we don't know what the after effects will be, but let's just say it was a good thing. It was a good thing. The fact is that the Abraham Accords that were strategic decisions made by the ruler of the UAE and the king of Bahrain and the king of Morocco in 2020 have held even in the midst of war. And the meetings that I've been fortunate to have with HAC colleagues over the last 4 years, and over the last year, since October 7th, with rulers and leaders in these countries, affirms their commitment to staying on that course of Israel's regional integration, as well as meetings that I've also been privileged to have with Saudi officials who are determined, and they've said it publicly. The Prince Faisal has said it, and the ambassador in Washington and the ambassador in the UK have said, we want normalization with Israel. Obviously, there needs to be progress on a Palestinian front. There needs to be a movement toward Palestinian statehood. And that's going to be a complicated proposition, but it's the direction that ultimately this has to go. But we are committed to that regional integration of Israel. We will all benefit from that. And if you keep hearing that from leaders, even of countries that do not have relations now with Israel, that that's the direction they want to go, that is positive, and I don't want this conference to end on that sour note without even recognizing that. Maybe there isn't a lot of other good news in the world, but that is a piece of good news, and we'll get through the current war, and we'll get back on the track of Arab-Israeli peacemaking, and even Israeli-Palestinian peacemaking, although obviously the complications in that would command an entirely other conference, but I would be happy to be part of that.
Thank you so much.
But I should have said one more thing, because it's been raised in the course of this panel of nuclear proliferation. Yeah. Which I skated over, and that was a mistake. I don't know why we should assume that after 80 years, after the last time there was the wartime use of a nuclear device, we can go another 10 years, given the racing of technology and the ambitions of autocrats. The development of small tactical nuclear weapons, the possibility of them being used, it just grows with each passing year. So I'm very concerned that we will not get through the next 10 years without some kind of a use of a nuclear device. Having just reversed the mood that I tried.
Yes, you did actually.
Please accept my apologies.
You were doing so well for a while there. I want to bring in some questions from the audience, but first, just for you, Una, and for you, Hiro, I would like to hear a little bit about your thinking about our means and our alliances and what we can do. I mean, I think, for example, in Japan, you now have a prime minister who very clearly states that the current alliances and the current arrangements are not enough. We need an Asian NATO. But maybe you first, Una, because I know you have been thinking a lot about this. Do we have the institutional setup that we need to take this on, this climate change?
Well, the issue that we're facing is domestic. And we see that populism, which was such a popular word and such a popular topic for BA theses in 2015, has not gone away. And we see that mainstream political forces, especially when elections are approaching, are forced to cater to those agendas and even have policies, close off borders, let's not name any names, but within a free, a union which moves with free movement, but to just kind of show that they are aware of the publics that are susceptible to these narratives. And that is the big issue, because the way how to face these challenges is to make yourself useful, is to show that, this is what I contribute to the existing order, to the existing alliances, and this is what I get out of it. But when you have such a polarization domestically, you kind of end up with a very soggy middle path. And to me, that is the big challenge. But then on the other hand, again, I'm playing the, I'm wearing the optimist hat today because why not? On the other hand, if we have a domestic issue, it's probably easier to solve because we have more control over it, ultimately, than over global issues.
Yeah. Hiro.
Okay, so in order to save the time for the Q&A, I will be very short. But as you mentioned, Japanese Prime Minister proposed, not insisted, the need to create Asian version of NATO. And obviously, it is very, very unrealistic. This means that when Philippines fight war against China, Japan have to fight war against China to help Philippines. And conversely, Philippines will help Japan if Japan have a war against China. So it is, I'm sure he knows that. But he is a very unique character. Sometimes Japan have a unique leader like him. But his point, I think, is that we have to think plan B. Yesterday, I asked about what is this morning, I asked about what is the plan B for US allies in Europe and Asia. And I think that all discussion in Tokyo or in Europe, everywhere among US allies is basically staying in plan A dash. That is not, let's stop free riding US security umbrella, but let's keep on relying sustainably. But maybe the world is now shifting to the plan B domain. And maybe he instinctively wants to ring the alarm bell that we have to be more creative to ready for the plan B world. Otherwise, plan B will come and hit us. In South Korea, more than 70% of people believe that they need their own nuclear capability. So they are aware of the plan B world is coming. So in order to avoid plan B, we have to think about the plan B. It's paradox, but that is my point.
No, and I think the time frame issue also makes it necessary to actually work on both plan A and plan B at the same time.
Right.
I would like to bring in the audience here. There are lots of bright minds. The gentleman, please. There's a microphone over there.
Klaus Wittmann, Potsdam University, former general. I have not so much a question, but a brief comment. And the question would be, what do you think about that? When I read this title, Projecting 10 Years Ahead, a thought comes to my mind which was probably not intended. As a historian, the question, How will certain politicians, not to name names here, abroad, and their behavior towards Ukraine be judged in the light of history? When I studied history in the 70s, the famous Treitschke adage, men make history, was out. There was the emphasis on structural history, economic history, social history, but how often could we observe how individuals make a difference to the good or to the bad, if you think of Gorbachev and Kohl or Milosevic and Putin. There is a very recommendable triple biography from an Australian called O'Sullivan, the Pope, the President, and the Prime Minister, three who saved the world. And I remember that time, the end of the 70s, doom and gloom in the West. The Soviet Union is on the winner path, and he describes how Reagan challenged communism and the Soviet Union politically and militarily, the Pope politically and spiritually, and Thatcher economically. And what I mean to say by all this is that for influencing the next 10 years in the right direction and not in the direction of Russia, China, Iran, we need not only structures, institutions, and procedures, but leaders who are bold and innovative, and those must be promoted and must be supported. And my last sentence, I find it odd that more statesman-like behavior vis-à-vis Russia is to be found, for instance, in Denmark, the Netherlands, the Baltic countries, than in some more important states.
Thank you very much. I think these long time perspectives really make us ask the question, will our generation of leaders be seen as people who saved the world, so to say? We'll come back to that. We had a question over here.
So my question is actually really short. What do you believe is not going to change over the next 10 years?
Oh, maybe we start with that. What is not going to change? Is there anything that is not going to change? Una, do you want to take...
Yes, absolutely. Actually, that is a question that I've been thinking about too just now, in the sense that, especially after Juan's comment, that there are many things that China can offer to Latin America and to developing countries in general, and I think that's not going to change. There will be a demand for domestic societal security. And frankly, a demand that we should not be, sitting on our high horses about. We should be very aware that this is a real problem for human development, that when you cannot grant that security to your constituents, to your citizens, that is not going to change. And China's ability to provide on that front, side-passing some value-based concerns, is not going to change. Another thing that's not going to change is the speed of development, is the various different speeds of development overall, and also the fact that the countries that are used to looking in the mirror and seeing themselves as developed are going to face more and more issues that we see already now with the cost of living crisis, with the populations actually not buying into that story of success anymore. But another thing that's not going to change in the next 10 years is, I think, and I'm going to contradict myself here, I did say the worst case scenario is when large alliances become redundant. I actually feel that that is a stability there, and we are institutionally very connected, and somehow maybe caught the time when it was still possible to build these trust-based alliances. So I think they have a little bit of air in them still, and in the next decade, they will still cater to our needs.
Yes, thank you. Jason.
I guess, first of all, a tremendously ambitious title and theme, and I guess we have to have a little humility in approaching something like this. I mean, I remember going to a World's Fair in the 1960s and seeing flying cars that we'd all be driving by now, which we're clearly not. But I do want to just respond to something that you said, sir, because you're absolutely right. Looking ahead to how we're going to judge leaders and how they responded to the crises of the day, and especially the three crises that are very much on my mind: the necessity of standing up against aggression, particularly in the case of Ukraine, but just generally, and China, and Iran, standing up against terrorism, which Israel is doing and the United States is trying to do, and other countries in this room are very much involved in. And then lastly, intolerance and hate. My community, the Jewish community, has suffered a surge of anti-Semitism. There's also Islamophobia. There are other kinds of discrimination in the world. We do not have enough leaders who are forceful enough in confronting these dangers. So judging the leaders of today from a perspective of 10 years from now, let's meet again in 10 years and discuss how they have done. I'm hoping that they'll do a whole lot better than they're doing now.
Thank you. These are actually perfect closing words. I know there were some more questions in the audience, but we have 2 seconds to go now. So I really, really apologize to those of you who had questions and didn't have the opportunity to post them. There's a coffee break now, so you will have the chance to chat with our speakers. I want to thank these fantastic and very brave panelists who, with humility, I would say, have tried to sketch what our future will look like. And I hand over to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.